Okay, we're back. In the previous video, I unintentionally didn't mute while I was sanding, and I wanted to make a point of when I pulled the tape off of the guitar. You remember from the previous video, I had taped off the binding so that when I was sanding, it would not, adjust my camera slightly. When I was sanding, it would not, the sides, it would not get into that beautiful black binding that Solo so generously put on this guitar. It has turned out to be a little bit of a trial because when I went to pull off the blue tape, and you remember that I used this painter's blue tape to tape off all of my binding before I started sanding the sides. As I pulled that off, I actually started to get some tear out. Everywhere it was stuck to the body as it rolled over the binding, because I made the edge of the blue tape go right and follow every little bit. But that extra little bit of tape, I folded it over and I stuck it right to the front part of the body, the top. And I over aggressively pulled that tape off, and I had some tear out. And it was in the previous video, but as I was muting and talking about it, I apologize. I was explaining what happened and it was muted. So here we are. Human made a mistake. So there was a big piece of tear out, and it was a piece of wood grain that had pulled up almost that high. So I didn't show it in the video, but I went and got some I didn't freak out. I went and got some CA glue, which is like super glue. It's not the stuff that you can buy at 7-Eleven or insert name of store that you go to buy your glue. And I took that piece of tear out, which was still attached to the body, but it had torn out the grain. Now remember, we're dealing with basswood here, and again, to reiterate, basswood is the softest of the hardwoods. This is a budget build. I don't care that it's basswood, and you shouldn't either. We're going to make this guitar look and sound beautiful. But that tear out, I freaked out just for a moment, and then went, nope, we're going to fix that. And I glued it back in there with some CA glue, and you can't even tell where the repair was done. Then I went and, as like I said, over aggressively pulled the blue tape off all around here. I noticed that there was fuzz pulling up on the wood grain all around where the tape had stuck to the body. So what did I do? I had to go back, get the sander, and start over again. Now I started in the middle sander, the sanding 240, and then I went to 320. And to reiterate, I eventually am going to go to, even though Solo says you can finish it with 320, I'm going to go to 400 and then maybe even 600 later, before I get to the point where I am going to start putting a finish on this, whether it be stain or a spray can paint job. Going to have to sleep on that for a little bit. But you can see that's where the problem was, right there, and I defied the camera to pick that up. It was right there. There was a big piece of tear out. I saved it. I glued it back down with some CA glue, let it dry, and there was a little push out of glue everywhere here. Sanded it back down, and all the fuzz that was around there. So basswood, soft, but very forgiving, and it was able to come back up to a nice smooth. Literally, I could start staining this today if I wanted to, but I'm going to take it a step further in the next video and actually go to 400 and then a 600, sand it down super smooth. And the same with the back. I'm gonna. This came out beautiful. I wish, again, to repeat, I wish this grain was showing on the front, but it's not, and we're going to have to deal with that. Life is life. You deal with what is pitched to you. The next thing that I was going to do, as you see, our neck is waiting patiently for us. I was going to mock up and set the neck, set the bridge, and well, the bridge and the pickup are the same unit in this particular style guitar. And what I always do before I get too far along is set the neck. In this particular case, thank Buddha that it screws in. You can see that's the Fender style, which I prefer personally. Put the bridge and the saddle assembly, in this case with the pickup, and then run the high E string and the low E string to make sure that we have the proper string spacing on the fretboard. In other words, if you do the low E and the high E, you can judge where your string spacing is going to be on here. And basically what that is doing is checking the factory screw holes. These are the main ones right here, because these three screw holes have to line up with how the strings are going to line up on the fretboard. And that is key to making a guitar play. You can't have your E string too far in or too far out. It'll try to flop off the board, or the high E, same issue. And they all have to be the same distance. But once you get those two on there and you sight down and take a measurement, you know, okay, yep, we're ready. We mocked it up. We're ready to go forward. So I'm going to pause really quickly, and I think I'm going to go ahead and do that now since I have this video running. It'll only take a few minutes, and you're going to learn a few things. Stand by. Okay, so here we are. This is the mock-up that I was talking about. We have the bridge with the bridge pickup. It's all one assembly on this particular model. There are 3 screws pre-drilled into the body. We're going to mock up this bridge, the neck, and we're going to put 2 strings on it, the low E and the high E, just to check for string spacing on the neck. If we see that the string spacing on the high E and the low E are correct just from this mock-up, then we know we can move forward with finishing the guitar, the surface, the paint, the stain, whatever we decide to do. But this is an important step, and before you get too far along, you want to do this. So we have the neck plate, all right, and the 4 screws that go with that. We have the 3 screws that are going to actually hold this in place. Now we're going to go ahead and seat this. None of this is going to live in here permanently yet, and we're going to hope that this tightens up. Correctly. If it doesn't, well, there's a fix for that. Now you'll notice that that particular saddle doesn't right in the way where that needs to be. So I have to pull that out of the way, get the screw in there. We could probably get away with just the 2. I know later on we're going to have to pick this saddle up and probably move it out of the way to get that center screw in. You don't need to do that for today's purposes. Now these are countersunk, so when they seat, they're going to pull, the theory is they're going to pull that bridge into the position where it needs to be. And if Solo did their job right, that bridge is set. You have 1/3 screw to go in there, but we'll get to that. For today's purposes, that's enough. You can see the wires that popped through for that pickup. That's another day, another job, a different phase of the build. Right now, we're going to flip this girl upside down and figure, let's make sure that our neck likes to sit in there where it belongs. Usually these should be snug, but not tight. You want to make sure you have it all the way back. You don't want any real gaps there. Which on this particular one, there is some gappage. Now, I noticed in that neck pocket, before I test fitted this, there's some extra goony goo goo stuff going on there. Could just be a piece of wood in the way. Let's test fit it one more time. And be careful, you'll notice that the fretboard actually extends past the actual neck wood. You don't want to just grab hold of that and peel up on it, because you could leverage that fretboard right off of the neck. That is seating pretty good. It seats beautifully on this side. This part of the neck pocket is a little bit too big, but it's seating there and it's nice and snug. Now, the tricky part is to look in these holes and make sure. Sorry, did I move my camera? And they are lining up perfectly. Yeah. Well, this is always a moment of truth. You don't want to do that, because I just put a ding in my body. And you certainly don't want to use a power tool on this. Get some of these threads started. For the first one, and you're going to lay it down. Get your neck plate lined up. And once you get one of these driven home, and be careful and go ever so slowly. Don't get in a hurry. Remember, this is just a mock-up. Okay, I can feel it. It's actually going into the neck. It's going to pull up. Don't go home. My years of being a mechanic, you never go put a wheel on a car and go all the way around in a circle. You go like a star. And it's the same principle here. You go from that corner to that corner. And again, you're not driving these home yet. This is just a test fit. And if it feels like it's getting too tight, that means something ain't right. I know that that is grabbing a hold of the neck. You don't need to go home with it. And don't use a power tool on this. For God's sakes, don't do it. If you've been doing this for 100 years like I have, and you're taking a guitar neck off of a Fender guitar, and you know what you're doing, you can use it to pull the screws out. You might even use it to put them in, but generally I don't. I want to feel it with my fingertips, what's happening. It's wood. You know, you can feel what's happening. If you put a power tool on that and it starts to split the wood, you're not going to feel it until it's too late. And we're going to put number 4 in. And then we're going to drive them home a little bit and make sure that they seat. I want to feel them seat. And then we're going to pull that neck off after we get done. Oh, nice, beautiful. Pulled right up. Nice. Nice. And you don't have to ream these down. This is just a test fit. Get them snug and live with it. As soon as you put that neck on there, it starts to look like a guitar. Instantly. You guys have seen this image on my bench a million times. A guitar with a neck on the neck, you know, the neck saddle up here, you know, holding that thing. It instantly turned it into a guitar. So you can see what the end game is going to be with this. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to run a low E string. And then we're going to run a high E string. Let's see if we can find the strings. Where are they? And then we got, of course, they're cheapies, so they're not going to color code them for us. We have to either know what we're doing or measure them. And they're twisted into a knot. Stand by. So, as I was explaining before, what we did was we bolted the bridge in just to get it snug. We put 2 tuners on there. Now these hold themselves. We're not stringing up the whole guitar. We're just doing a mock setup. And what I noticed right off the bat is that the E string, the low E string, looks pretty good. I'd like to see it a little bit more towards the edge of the fretboard, but the high E, unacceptable. And that comes up to the nut. So at the end of this, before we go any further with, you know, after we get done painting and doing all the finish work on it, I know I'm pulling this nut out and I'm putting a new nut in there. This factory string spacing up here is wrong. And I gotta say it and call it like I see it. This high E string is way too far in. The low E is acceptable, but it still isn't exactly where I would like to see it. The high E, way too far in. Way too far in. And as you sight down, you see it. It should be at least 2 millimeters that way. I'm not even going to try to measure it. My eyeball can tell me that it's too far in towards the center of the neck, which is going to affect the way, you know, the way the guitar feels and plays. I mean, Teles are a little bit like that, but they're not like Strats where the string is right on the edge. There's measurements for all of this stuff. I can tell by looking at that, I don't like that. That's string spacing up here. They cut the nut wrong. And it's a cheap nut anyway. A simple nut installation will only take me an hour or so. The E string, the low E, is probably acceptable, but I'd still like to see it slightly towards the outside of the fingerboard. So what I'm going to do, when it gets time to set this guitar up and it's all painted and looking pretty, we're going to knock that nut out before we do a final setup on it. And we're going to put a new nut. But I'm going to use that nut to do all the setup, because that won't change intonation and string height and all that stuff. What it's going to, it might affect string height slightly because these are just pre-cut. They need to be slotted better, but their spacing is way off. So when I get to that juncture, I'm going to knock that nut out of there and I'm going to put a new nut in it. This guitar is going to deserve that. So that was today's function of mocking up this guitar. And there's a reason why you do that early on, so you know what you're facing later. I know that this is centered enough, you know, because it's not the bridge that's causing this. It's the nut. It is the nut. It is the nut slots that were pre-cut from the factory. Solo, whoever did it. And that's what we're going to rectify because we can. We'll talk soon. Have a great one. I'm back really quickly. While I had this mocked up, I just checked a few things. Now I can see that the saddles are already pretty tall, and we need to bring our string action down. I can tell the string action is way too high, but we have plenty of adjustment here. We're not trying to make the strings taller. We're going to actually lower the strings, and that's going to be unscrewing this and bringing the saddle down. These are just set up the way they're set up. I don't imagine anybody took any time to pre-measure our saddles, but I can tell that they're way too tall, the string action, but that's good because we bolted the neck on. And usually when you do a brand new build, you do this little exercise and the strings are all the way down on the neck, and you go, it doesn't play at all. But I've got plenty of action there, and I have plenty of adjustment here. We just have to lower these down and bring these saddles down, which will come into play later on, as you've seen me do a million times when we're setting this guitar up. That's encouraging, meaning that the neck pocket was cut correctly and the neck fits in there solidly. Okay, now we're gone for sure today. We'll talk soon.